welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I'm going to be talking to you about DNFs. I'm not a heavy DNFer for the most part, but I've been a little bit more free with some of my DNFs this year, but most of the time I don't talk about them on my channel. Because if I DNF a book that I'm not very far into it, I feel like I don't have a lot of thoughts to share and that people might not really be interested in what I have to say, but I think that there are people who are curious about every single DNF that I have, so I thought I would do a video sharing some DNFs that I have not talked about on my channel. I do have some more recent DNFs that I have talked about. So I talked about DNFing Starsight in September because I got 80% of the way through that book. And then I also talked about DNFing Hind's Feet on High Places because I got about 40% through that one. So I feel like if I've gotten through a substantial chunk of the book, then I can share my thoughts. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, both of those were also rereads, so I had the context of the entire book as well when I decided to DNF it. But these are books that I didn't really give that fair of a chance to. I just wasn't feeling it, and so I just didn't share. So we're going to start with Hester. Hester is a historical fiction that is kind of based around like the Scarlet Letter and Nathaniel Hawthorne. I read the first chapter of this book and that was it. And it was one that I had picked up because the cover is so pretty and I got it for like 25 cents at a library book sale, so I don't feel like it was a waste, honestly. But I was okay with the first chapter, but then I heard some things about it that it kind of like added things that were absolutely like not true about Nathaniel Hawthorne in his life to make the story more interesting, and that just kind of bothered me. So I DNF'd this one really quick, but I will say that I listened to the first chapter on audio and the audio was great. Like the narrator had a great accent and I was enjoying the production of it. But I'm not a big historical fiction girly anyways, as you probably know. If you're subscribed to my channel, you know that I don't read a lot of historical fiction. So I just didn't feel like going there. Another book that I DNF'd, I don't think I even finished the first chapter, is Bottolino by Umberto Eco. I read The Name of the Rose last year. It was my first Eco and I was so prepared to just love it, and I really loved the beginning of it. But it really derailed around the midpoint of the book and then the last half of the book. Not only did it feel too long, but there was just like this weird hyper fixation on the first sexual experience of this young boy who's kind of like an apprentice to this guy. I mean, I guess, I don't know. He was like a monk, but now he's like a detective monk, so it's kind of weird how all that works. But it's set in the Middle Ages during a time period that I hadn't really read very much of, and so I was really interested in it. But that like really, it just felt like we could not move on from this, and we kept revisiting it over and over again, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like this isn't even what this book is supposed to be about. And it just like, I don't know, it was a little icky. So I was like, I want to give Umberto Eco another chance. So I started Bottolino with Dia actually, and I don't think Dia even picked it up because I read part of the first chapter and there was already like very detailed, like much more detailed than The Name of the Rose, like stuff that I'm like, we're gonna be focused on this again, but from the very beginning. And I already had a really full TBR that month and I was just like, you know what? I don't want to do this. I think maybe Umberto Eco is not for me. So I DNF'd that one. I do still have Foucault's Pendulum and I would like to give that one a try at some point because I've heard good things about that. But I had another book of his. I can't remember what it was. If I remember, I'll put the title on the screen. But I had another book of his and I got rid of that one and I got rid of Bottolino and I got rid of The Name of the Rose because even though there were parts of The Name of the Rose that I loved, I was like, I don't think I'm going to reread this. So I'm still going to give Foucault's Pendulum a try. But other than that, I think I'm done with Umberto Eco. A couple of middle grades that I DNF'd. So every year what I like to do is I like to try to read all the Newbery Honor books, like all the books that were recommended as well as the winner, and then just compare and see like, do I think that the winner that they chose is the winner that deserved to win? And I did a whole vlog on it last year. I was going to do that this year. And I did not because I really was not enjoying the books. And I completed 2 of them. One of them I like actively disliked and one I thought was just okay. And then I DNF'd 2 of them. So one of them was The Many Assassinations of Samir, the Interstellar of Dreams, which is such a long title for middle grade. Like, what kid is going to remember the title of this book? It was like really odd. I don't even remember a ton about it because it was a while ago. I think I actually got about halfway through this one before I DNF'd it, and it was just boring. And I was like, who is this for? Like, this does not feel like this is for middle grade. Like, this feels like it's so like historically steeped, and but yet there's supposed to be like this, I think, fantastical element to it. And it just like, I don't know, like I don't even remember very much about it. I just remember feeling so bored and then finally being like, why am I doing this to myself? I'm like putting myself into a middle grade slump by just reading a whole bunch of middle grades that I'm really not enjoying. I also tried Simon Sort of Says, which is another Newbery honor. This one actually is a soft DNF for me, but I'm still bringing it up here because I'm talking about middle grade DNFs. So this one is about a young boy who is a survivor of a school shooting, which you don't know that at the beginning of the book, but it is on the inside flap and like very prominent. And I'm pretty sure that that's why this was nominated for a Newbery, is because it's dealing with like a tough topic that does unfortunately happen to middle grade children. What the story ends up being about, like he's survived the school shooting, and so his family, they try to move to a new town and start over and start fresh with the hope of helping Simon be able to move past this really traumatic event. It wasn't bad. I think I got maybe 15 to 20% of the way through this book. And it wasn't bad. I wasn't super invested in it, but the issue that I was having is I read this at the same time I read The Labors of Hercules Beale by Gary D. Schmidt. And they had a really similar kind of feel to them, and that they were both told in first person by a young boy who has experienced something super traumatic in his life, and there's like some quirky funny side characters, and they just had like kind of a similar feel. But I was enjoying Hercules Beale a lot more, and I just kind of didn't want to confuse the two by reading two super similar books at the same time. So that is one that I'd still potentially like to go back to at some point, but it wasn't something that I was enjoying so much that it's high on my priority list. So if you've read Simon Sort of Says and you really enjoyed it, I would love to know, so that way I know whether or not it's worth going back to. I know that actually the middle grade March book club, that I think they do like a bi-monthly book club or something, they just read this. So if you read it with them and you enjoyed it, I would love to hear your thoughts. Or if you didn't enjoy it and you thought that it wasn't worth reading, I'd love to hear that too, because it's one of those ones where I'm like, I'll probably go back to it, but it's just not high on my priority list because I haven't heard anyone else really talking about it. And the last middle grade that I have on here that I have DNF'd was Temple Alley Summer. This is translated from Japanese, and I think it's like the same author who wrote a book that ended up being a Studio Ghibli film, but I can't remember. I think maybe it's like whichever one. I want to say it was like Kiki's Delivery Service, but I don't know. But I think that they wrote something that ended up becoming a Studio Ghibli film. And this has got a Studio Ghibli feel to it. It's about a young boy who sees this girl who's like a ghost, but then he goes to school the next day and she's there and everyone remembers her and knows who she is, and he doesn't, like, he's so confused, like, because he doesn't remember her but everyone else does, and it's like, it's strange. And I just like was having a really hard time getting into it. I think I read the first like 2 or 3 chapters, and the chapters are on the long side, so I would say I got at least like 10 to 15% of the way through this book. And it was just one of those books where I was like, I was really going to try to read it. It was actually like, I was going to do like kind of like a double feature with my Patreon group, because they choose a book for me to read recommended by them. And it was a month where I put up a poll and it was tied with another book. So I was going to do like a double feature, and then I just didn't get to them both. So unfortunately, yeah. So I ended up DNFing it, and I kind of like wasn't really feeling it anyway. So it worked out okay that by the time I went to go read it, someone else had voted, and so it was no longer a tie. So it worked out. I have one more book on this list that I don't think I've really talked about on my channel. I have other DNFs, like I said, that I've talked about here and there. So this one I hesitate to talk about because I'm pretty sure it's a soft DNF, and that's Moby Dick by Herman Melville. I've tried to read this book twice, once last year and once this year. And last year I just like couldn't get into it because I was like really overloaded. I was trying to read it during a time of year where I already had a really full TBR. So it wasn't that I wasn't enjoying it. I was like, I'll get to this next year. And I put it on my classics TBR for this year. And I was just like, I, again, was kind of overloaded the month I was trying to read it. And so I didn't really want to do it a disservice by reading it when I didn't have like the mental bandwidth to actually give it the attention it deserves. But I will say that parts of it were also kind of hard to read, which is, it has that reputation of being kind of dry and having a lot of information about whaling. But I liked where some of the story was going. I think I DNF'd this and I was in the 30 to 40% range in the book when I DNF'd it. So I'd gotten to the point where they're now on the boat and we've met the captain and all that stuff, but we haven't really been introduced to the whole like Moby Dick part of the story, the white whale part of the story. We haven't gotten there yet. It hadn't really gotten to like a very interesting part of the plot, but there were some really interesting explorations of racism in the book so far, which is really interesting given the time period that it was written in, because most of the time books that are written in this time period are blatantly racist, and there were definitely some terminology and things said that would not fly nowadays. But there's a realization of the main character fairly early on in the book of like, oh man, these people that I thought were savages and I thought that they were a certain way, like that's not accurate. They're actually real people. They're not savage monsters. And so although there were some things in it that I was like, you would not say that nowadays. You could not say that nowadays. Like, I did still really like that there was a realization of like, this is a stereotype that is unfair and untrue, and they're people too. So I really did like that aspect of it, and I thought that that was interesting. But again, it was difficult and required me actually fully engaging my brain in a way that I didn't have time to do. So I would still like to get back to it at some point, but I also don't know if it bodes well that I've DNF'd this book twice. Sometimes it's worth it for me to come back to a book that I've DNF'd multiple times and just say, I'm going to conquer this book at long last. And Les Miserables is a great example of that. I had DNF'd that book 3 times, and then finally towards the beginning of my booktube journey there was a group here that was reading the book during the summer, and I was like, I'm gonna do it, and I did, and I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. I thought it was a masterpiece, and I was so glad that I stuck with it and came back to it. And I actually did something similar with War and Peace, where I had DNF'd that one either once or twice and then came back to it and was glad that I read it. Although I didn't give it 5 stars, but I did still enjoy it and was glad that I conquered it. And so, yeah, so I have a couple of classics that are like that I have DNF'd. Actually, Don Quixote is another one, but I DNF'd that last year. So anyways, so there's a couple classics that I'm like, I want to conquer this someday because it has cultural relevance and I feel like it would be important or good for me to read. And sometimes those classics end up being favorites, and I'm so glad that I pushed myself. And so I feel like Moby Dick will probably be one of those. I have a couple of friends that actually really loved it, and then I have some friends who did not love it. But I think that I'd fall in the category of at least liking it and being glad that I read it, because I wasn't disliking it at the time that I DNF'd it. Okay, so those are some DNFs that I haven't really discussed on my channel before. So let me know what you thought of this video. Do you like hearing about DNFs of books that I didn't really get that much of a chance to? I mean, some of them I did. I gave a chance to Moby Dick for sure, but most of these I got like maybe a quarter of the way through at most, some of them only 1 chapter. And so I feel like I don't always have like a valid opinion to share of why I DNF'd a book. But I'd love to hear from you if this is something that you like hearing about periodically or not. And I'd also love to hear from you in the comments down below. Are you a heavy DNFer? If you're not feeling it, do you just say, nah, no, we'll push that to another time? Or are you someone that when you start a book, you have to finish it? Like you feel an obligation to finish it whether or not you're enjoying it? Because I know that there's a wide range of people who are like that. But I definitely know that like a lot of mood readers are definitely like, maybe I'll come back to it later when I'm in the mood. Maybe I'll never come back to it. So I think mood readers are more apt to DNF, but there are people who are not mood readers who feel an obligation to finish a book regardless of their feelings about it as they go. So I'd love to know, which one are you? Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.